another edition of the Oneness Hour. A little bit of personal in the background there I thought was appropriate for today's topic, which, like many of my talks, turned out to be inspired by what I talked about yesterday and what I've thought about since. Well, yesterday, if you remember, I talked about the Mahdi, the Messiah of the Islamic tradition. And that led me down a rat hole that I've been before, a little further this time. I touched on yesterday when I told you that it was my belief that the wife of Al-Mahdi was a descendant of Caesarean line. And the Caesarean line that I actually believe is tied to the Christian Messiah and connects all these stories together in a very neat way that probably no one's gotten real close to before, because almost everybody who takes a stand on religion either is dogmatically defensive of their story, or and dismissive of anybody else's, or just dismisses the whole thing as a bunch of nonsense. So we're going to call this one, sorry for the kind of facetious title, but I got a sense of humor, Paging Joseph to the Delivery Room. We have a suspected bomb. I don't know, I probably said a bad word there, and I'm going to get demonetized and deplatformed or whatnot just for even putting that word in the title. But I think you'll understand why I chose that title soon. One of the things that I think is important in this story, I'm going to tell you, is the stories that it invalidates. And one that's been in the news a lot lately and been being pushed a lot by a new cult, and it is definitely a cult, the idea that Jesus lived in the East and died in the East and spent time studying with the ascended masters in India or somewhere out there. I'm going to be thoroughly debunking that story, and debunking, as I spent a lot of time doing, this nonsense narrative of cosmic oneness. This new cult of materialist I am God nonsense that a lot of people are embracing because it's so popular, and it's being allowed to be spread because it serves the agenda of the folks who want to bring you an Orwellian world government under the control of basically the new godfathers and godmothers of the earth, whose woke cult zombies are vehemently standing behind everything this cult projects globally, no matter how much is exposed. And if you've known any of the truth of the pandemic, you know any of the truth of this proxy war in Ukraine, you know any of the truth of how it all ties back to some dirty dealing between communists in China and Russia and the United States government and Europe, and fascists. They're communists and fascism are part of the same coin. These powerful folks that control the economy, that control the money, have been at work for a long time trying to bring a new world order. What does that mean? Well, a new world order means that they are in charge. They can do whatever they want, like the old world orders. And there was not just one. The Catholic order that ruled Europe was just one of these fake religions with a fake nobility that sustained authoritarian governments. The Chinese dynasties were the same things. The Mughal dynasty of Asia, all of these dynasties, the caliphates, etc., all these worshippers of power and control are the bad guys, essentially. I mean, they're good guys in the sense that they do provide order. They do allow civilization to continue and to grow and adapt. But to the extent that they get into these periodic battles between their factions over who the godfather or godmother is, who's going to get to rule, one ring to rule them all, they become the enemy. And the adversary works through them to try to destroy the chosen species, humanity. Okay, so where am I going to go with this? Now, yesterday we talked about, I forget the guy's name, I wish I could credit him, but the author of the book and the internet presentation called Caesar's Messiah. And we talked about a little bit about his premise that if you look at the writings of Josephus, you will see that there's a strong parallel in the narrative of the conquest of Judea to the story that he presents regarding Messiah. And as I mentioned yesterday, Josephus is the only primary source that is very well attested, because he was the favored writer who recorded the exploits of Vespasian and his son Titus in conquering and taming the Jews. That's the only really well-attested record we have of the era. All of the other Gospels are not well attributed, and the earliest we can trace any of them is roughly about 100 years later. And this is why so many have called into question at least parts of the Christian narrative. Okay, well, I'm going to do Christians and Muslims and Jews a favor and tie this all together so you know that you each have a Messiah. You each have many Messiahs. You have your own prophets. And they're all tied together by a common narrative that goes with the whole reason for this human species we live in. It's a chosen species. It has chosen people. It has chosen religions that sort of carry the standard forward for a while, just like there are chosen countries, chosen leaders who will be very successful for a while and be the torchbearer of culture and civilization, and then will die out. And we're going to tie that together in ways that may blow some minds. So be prepared to be mind blown. Okay, let's look at this cat, Josephus, for a little bit. Okay, Flavius Josephus. How did he get that name, Flavius? Well, he was adopted into the family of Vespasian, who was a Flavian. He was the first of the Flavian dynasty of emperors, which, if you know the sequence, that was the second dynasty after the 12 Caesars ended with Nero. Interesting. Now, Josephus was a leader, one of the main leaders of the Jewish rebellion, the Jewish war, which is a big part of Jewish history and a big piece of their messianic fervor, because it was all about, centered around a messianic leader who rebelled against Rome and wanted to reestablish the kingdom of Israel. Okay, this Josephus guy was an interesting character. So he was a leader, let's see, he was a leader of one of the groups here. I don't think he was actually in Masada, maybe he was in Jerusalem at the time, but basically he was the leader of one of the groups at war. Let me get to where I can scroll this. Let's see, let's just look at his whole life. Josephus was born into one of Jerusalem's elite families. He was the second-born son of Matthias, a Jewish priest. His older, full-blooded brother was also, like his father, called Matthias. So this was a dynastic priestly family. Their mother was an aristocratic woman who descended from the royal and formerly ruling Hasmonean dynasty. Now, if you know anything about the Hasmonean dynasty, you will know that this is the result of the intermarriage of the Seleucid Empire rulers with the Jewish priestly caste, if you will. And the Seleucid dynasty was at least somehow related to Alexander the Great. That was one of the successor empires that was established after Alexander's meteoric rise and sudden death and falling apart of his kingdom, which is a whole nother Messiah story that we'll cover another time. Josephus' paternal grandparents were a man also named Josephus, establishing a pattern of Joseph as an important name in this family. If you know dynastic families, you know that they tend to name one of their children after the father. Generally not necessarily the first child, just the child that the father somehow decides is his spiritual descendant. Kind of like my father, Robert, decided to name me Robert. Let's see. Also named his wife, an unnamed Hebrew noblewoman, distant relatives of each other. Okay. Josephus' family was wealthy. He descended through his father from the priestly order of blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's get to in his mid-20s, he traveled to negotiate with Emperor Nero for the release of some Jewish priests. Upon his return to Jerusalem, at the outbreak of the First Jewish-Roman War, blah, blah. Okay, then he became one of the leaders of this rebellion, and let's see. After the Jewish garrison of... Okay, so he was the last guy as a group of defenders of this one place who had agreed to commit suicide. This was basically how committed the Jews were to their rebellion against Rome. They said, we're gonna get back our kingdom or die. He was the leader of one of these groups and happened to draw the straw that allowed him to be the one chosen to be the last. At least that's how he tells the story. Allowed him to be the last to commit suicide. And he didn't commit suicide when it was his turn. Instead, he lived and went into the camp of the enemy, somehow became a close confidant of Vespasian, who at that time was not the emperor, was just the general assigned to stamp out the Jewish revolt, and became his favored literary accountant of his exploits in the war. What are the chances of that happening, I ask you? Okay, so here's what I'm going to tell you about what I believe really went on. Now, notice this part about his mid-20s. He traveled to negotiate with Emperor Nero for the release of some Jewish priests. My contention is that he probably, like many people did in that era, traveled along with some members of his family. Why would he be negotiating with the Emperor Nero? Well, there was this messianic fervor already going on at that time. The end of the rule of Emperor Nero happened about 69 AD. Close to, let's see, I think it was close to 69 AD. Let's look at Vespasian. When did he become emperor? Well, that's when he died. He became emperor around 67 or so. He didn't live long after he became emperor. Funny. No, he became emperor in 69 and died that very same year. Interesting. No, he died in 79. Okay, so he ruled for 10 years before he passed on his empire to his son. Okay, so Josephus spent some time in Rome negotiating with Nero when he was 20. That would have made him how old? And what year? That's 57 AD. Okay, that would have been about the time that Vespasian was making his way through the Cursus Honorum. Now, let's shift over and look at Vespasian for a little bit. Interesting guy. Early life. Born in Titus Flavius Vespasianus was born in a village northeast of Rome called Phalacrine. His family was relatively undistinguished and lacking in pedigree. The son of Titus Flavius Sabinus. Sabinus, that's a name that we're going to be coming to again. That's one of these old patrician families that had fallen on bad times. A Roman money lender, debt collector, and tax collector. Interesting. Well, let's see who this father of his was. Sabinus came from Reate in the Sabine region of Italy. Remember, the rape of the Sabine women was a very famous part of Roman mythology. The early story of Rome was that the Romans had no women, and the twins, Romulus and Remus, raided the Sabines and took their women back to Italy, those Sabine women. The son of Titus Flavius Petro and his wife Tertulla. He served as a customs official and then as a banker in the province of Asia, which, if you know about the province of Asia, included this rebellious area of Judea. At the time, it wasn't a separate province. It was a part of the general province of Asia. Or nearby. It was very closely related to it. Let's put it that way. Asia was, at that time, a province in Turkey, but because of its relation to the Seleucid Empire, was very closely related, interrelated to the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt and the Seleucid Empire, which was the Empire of the East. These successor states that maintained power in the area after Alexander died. He was there honored with statues dedicated to an honest tax gatherer. Now, that had to be a pretty blessed guy, didn't he? That might be the kind of guy who would attract the interest of karma. And later as a banker at Avinticum among the Helvetian Gaul, where he died. With his wife Vespasia Paula, he had at least two sons, the consul Titus Flavius Sabinus and Titus Flavius Vespasianus, the future emperor Vespasian, and also a daughter who died in infancy, Flavia Vespasia. Well, let's go back to his son here. Now, here's something interesting about his early life. Early in his life, he was somewhat overshadowed by his older brother, Titus Flavius Sabinus, who had entered public life and pursued the Cursus Honorum, holding an important military command in the Danube. Interesting. Now, why would he have been reluctant to enter public life? And why would he, it says, let's see, it says something about his mother having to encourage him to enter public, let's see, early life. They tried several times to get these posts and so forth in Rome's leadership. Had a hard time making his way. I forget where it's where it said here. You can read it yourself. But anyway, his mother had to push him into politics, and he had a hard time making it as compared with his older brother. Now, you might think that that was because, well, maybe they had this idea that the oldest was the one who deserved the most credit. That's not the way things worked in Rome, in fact. Anybody who had the right blood could apply for public office, and in the Republican way of things, promotions were based upon, at least supposed to be based upon merit, not upon birth. And that had very much become more the case later on in the late Roman Republic, after plebeians were allowed to follow the cursus honorum. Originally, it was only patricians, those born of certain old Roman families, that could advance. And the Republic evolved to allow others to get this, and it was actually still in the process of evolving at the time. And this was one of the key issues that was destroying the Roman Republic at the time, between this battle between the faction of Pompey and the faction of Marius. And if you remember, Caesar was a partisan of Marius. This was the faction of Rome, the more democratic faction, who wanted to give people more capabilities, who wanted to allow their soldiers to be given full citizenship and given colonies to found that they would then be able to send their leaders to the Senate. And the more conservative faction, the Pompeian faction, thought that was a bad idea because it would dilute their power in Rome. And that's what the Roman civil wars were all about. You remember, Caesar won that civil war and was assassinated because they were afraid he was going to establish a kingdom, because he'd had a son with Cleopatra in Egypt, who was descended of one of these old families, the Ptolemaic family of the successor kingdoms. I hope you're seeing how a lot of these threads are tying together. Now let's see. It doesn't say much about this, and this is interesting what these Wikipedia articles leave out and what they put in. But if you go do a little bit more research about this interesting Titus Flavius, Vespasianus, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, you will note that he was famous before he rose. He was pretty well off as a mule driver, as somebody who provided mules for caravans. This is going to be important later on. His mules were reputed to be the best in Rome. Why? Because he had these connections to the east. And if you know anything about horses, you know that the best horses are Arabian. And we'll get back to that later. Think about where you've seen Arabian horses before in the lore about the time of Jesus. Okay, so interesting. There's a lot of connections to Asia here. And as a mule provider, a mule dealer, very likely, and especially since he had ties through his family to the east, he would have had a lot of involvement with Asia and the trade routes to the east. Now, I am going to propose, I don't have any proof of this, maybe there never will be any proof, but here's a piece of the story that I want you to take on faith. I'm going to propose that this father of Vespasian, while he was traveling in Asia as the banker, had an illegitimate child with a local woman. If you know much about how these sort of assignments worked, the Romans who would be assigned to be tax collectors would get this tax concession for a period of time as an office that would be appointed by the provincial governor. Okay, so this was something you sort of got appointed to collect taxes in the name of the governor, who often never actually went to the province they governed. If it was one of the well-established ones, they would stay in Rome, and they would send their send their tax collector out to do the main thing that they cared about, which was collecting taxes, making money. That's the whole reason you wanted to be the provincial governor of the province, especially a wealthy province like Asia. And you would want to appoint somebody very honest if you were a governor in absentia. I don't know who the governor of the province of Asia was at the time. I'll let somebody else do that research. I don't have to have all the answers. I don't want to have all the answers. I just want to give you enough dots to connect to know that what I'm telling you on my channel is not nonsense. I'm not crazy. Okay, so this tax collector went for a period of time. The provincial governors had a certain period of time they got to be the governor. So I don't know, it doesn't say what the years were, but somebody can probably figure that out from some records of the time. He collected taxes, was an honest tax collector, probably left his wife and older son in Rome. Very, very common. You didn't tend in these days to travel with your family. You tended to travel alone, especially if you were going on assignment as a banker, a tax collector, to one of the provinces, which weren't all that well established in that era. There was still a lot of ferment, a lot of turmoil, let's say, in the Eastern Empire, which had only been integrated within the last 30, 40 years and had been under a lot of pressure from the Civil War. Okay, so I'm proposing that he had an illegitimate child he brought back, and which his wife, being a pious woman, adopted as part of their family. Maybe the real mother died in childbirth, whatever. I am also going to propose that it's very likely that somebody whose son was going to become involved in the mule trade and have the best mules in Rome probably got those connections through the connections of his real mother in Asia, who probably had connections with the Asian banking and trade families, who were all connected through a network of rich people that bankrolled Alexander's conquest of Asia and the dynasties that came out of it. This is the way power is maintained, even if you have a change of empires, a change of rulers. In fact, there's my wife. She wants to say something to me. Okay. Oh, she's gonna go get pedicure or something like that. That was it? Oh, she's gonna get our pets groomed, not. Okay, well that's probably a good idea. It's gonna be expensive, but it's. Okay, sweetie. We'll see you later. Okay, back to the subject. So my proposition to you, and it's very logical as I've shown, was that this Vespasian, future emperor, was not the son of the mother that claimed him. And that very likely explains why he was reluctant to go into public office as his older brother had, because he knew that he was illegitimate. And he felt that that was going to be a problem. If it ever came out that he was not really the son of his mother, who raised him and probably loved him just like a son, that would ruin his whole career and disgrace him. Okay, back to Vespasian. Now, during his career, he was able to use his ties to the East to get appointed to a number of positions in the East. He served in the military in Thrace, which, if you don't know what Thrace is, that's the next province over from Asia and the European side, where the Balkans are now, Romania and Bulgaria, and almost up towards where the Ukraine is now. He obtained a post in the miter industry. His early performance was so unsuccessful, Emperor Caligula reportedly stuffed handfuls of muck down his toga to correct the unclean Roman streets, formerly his responsibility. Now you would think, after being disgraced by the emperor for blowing your first big assignment, supposedly, you'd never get another chance. Well, I'm going to propose to you that he probably didn't do a bad job of cleaning the streets. He just didn't have the money to go throw in and do it himself and ask the emperor for funds to do his job. And the emperor said, screw you. Let the streets be dirty. And that's the sort of emperor Caligula was. He would assign somebody to do something and then not give him the funds to do it because he wanted to spend it on all of his fun and lavish entertainments. And you can learn more about Caligula that way and see if that makes sense to me. During the period of the ascendancy of Sejanus, there is no record of Vespasian's significant activity in Caligula. Sejanus was the Praetorian prefect of the next emperor, Tiberius. Or actually, the previous emperor, Sejanus. Yeah. Or was he under Caligula? I've got to go back and look at that. There's no record. Vespasian was titled to stand for election as quaestor, a senatorial office, but his lack of political or family influence meant that Vespasian served as quaestor in one of the provincial posts in Crete, also in the Eastern Empire, and actually part of it bordering on Egypt. Cyrenaica was part of the province of Crete. So he would have spent a lot of time near Egypt at that time. And maybe he got this post because he had connections in Egypt among the elite. Let's see. That would have been a good way to get back in the good graces of the emperor, would it have not? He achieved praetorship in either 39 or 40 at the youngest age permitted. Now that's pretty strange for somebody who had such a disgraceful career. During a period of political upheaval in the organization of elections, his long-standing relationship with the freedwoman Antonia Sinus, confidential secretary to Antonia Minor, this would have been one of the very powerful females of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The 12 Caesars. And if you remember, I told you that 12 was an important number in the Messiah game. It was the number of generations from the establishment of a Messiah line that they were allowed to basically run this game. 12 emperors. Now, if you know anything about how this line got established, Caesar was assassinated, and they thought, oh, okay, we wiped him out. And Caesar named as his heir a nephew, Octavius, who didn't really have much going for him. He was not a great general, wasn't really very good at anything, was very young when he was established, and everybody thought that Caesar's chief lieutenant, the power behind Caesar, Mark Antony, was going to be the one who came out on top, and was pretty amazed when Octavian ended up being the winner. Okay, Vespasian served in the invasion of Britannia under Claudius as a legate. Maybe had some illegitimate children there because he probably didn't bring his wife to the war. That was not a common thing in those days. So Vespasian probably sowed some wild oats there. Oh, he was the legate of another legion assigned in Germania. Maybe another family was established there. Thanks to the influence of the imperial freedman Narcissus. Interesting cat. I would highly recommend reading some of the novels of another literary messiah, Robert Graves. He wrote a great novel called I, Claudius that tries to set the record straight about the Emperor Claudius, who was supposedly an idiot, but was actually arguably the second best emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty after Augustus. I think he was probably a better emperor than Tiberius. Those were the three, quote, good emperors, although Tiberius is much maligned by some of his detractors, especially for allowing the accession of Caligula, who was a real bastard. Okay, so that's another area of investigation you might want to follow down. I know a lot about that, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole today. Let's see, under Claudius, that was when he finally had some real success. He came out of retirement in 63 and was sent as governor to Africa province. Again, part of this, part of the Roman world which was not so connected to Rome, which had families that dated back, maybe tied back to the elite of Carthage. According to Tacitus, his rule was infamous and odious. According to Suetonius, he was upright and highly honorable. Now, this is a good indication that he was a character that was involved in some very deep political battles. And anybody that knows about political battles knows that it's the powers behind the throne that are manipulating power. The mafia families who have been behind behind every great man is a woman with connections, is the way I would put that. Let's see. Let's go back. Let's get back on track here. So eventually he became the leader of the force that was sent to put down the Jewish rebellion. Let's go back to Josephus now and look a little bit more what's going on here. So as we said, Josephus had been to Rome about the time of Nero's reign. That would have been a time when Vespasian was maybe back in good. So it was after the reign of Claudius, and he was at this time in retirement. Maybe awaiting new instructions. Now, at this time Nero died, I've got to mention something that really is weird here. Because, let's see if I still have it up. I'm going to pull this up because it's really strange, because it ties into something that happened today. My daughter, my second daughter, Eloise, sent me a picture today. She's been vacationing with her mom in Europe. She sent me a picture of the Matterhorn, a place I've never been. Now, if you know anything about the Matterhorn, it's a pretty incredible mountain. It's almost perfectly pyramidical, but clearly natural. And if you look at the history of how it was named, it turns out Servilian. It says it's related to the Servilian dynasty. This is one other of the old families of Rome, and may have gotten its name because of a Servilius Galba, who Caesar charged with opening up the Alpine passes. Interesting, because if you recognize the name Galba, you would also recognize one of the emperors of the year of 4 emperors after Nero was assassinated. Let's just go look a little bit at who this Galba character is. Okay, if you know any, Servius Sulpicius, so see, same family, Servius Sulpicius Galba. So related to this Galba character, who was a pretty important guy in Caesar's time. Galba was the one that the rich families of Rome went to. One of the wealthy family held all of the provinces of Aquitania, Upper Germany, and Africa. So that's where his connections lie. And he was the one chosen first to step up after Nero was assassinated. He didn't last long because the soldiers didn't like him. He was very frugal. He wanted to reestablish the treasury and recover from the damage that Nero had done with his obsessions with thinking he was a god and was a great musician and wasting all these monies on traveling around showing everybody what a wonderful talent he was. Okay, and you all know the story of Nero. Interesting that this was the supposed selected successor of the Roman families, their mafias, if you will, to be the next leader of Rome. He was assassinated, and then out of the blue, after a couple of other pretenders, Otho was one, and then Vitellius, two absolutely worthless characters who didn't have the connections that were wanted. Maybe were connected to other mafia families. That's the only way you got to be an emperor, was if there was a hole, you either had the support of a lot of rich families, or you were a member of one rich family or rich yourself and could buy it. Okay, so after these two came Vespasian. I'm not going to go into this. We can go down as many rat holes as you want here. I'm going to try to stay focused so this is not too long a presentation. At any rate, after 3 emperors in one year, all of a sudden, the world turns to Vespasian and says, "Oh, you need to be emperor." Now, mind you, this is a pretty accomplished guy. He's led the armies against this revolt of the Jews, but it was still going during this time. He had not beaten them, and he had a fairly mixed record. Must have been fairly well connected, huh? Considering where he started, and probably had really strong connections in the East, which is why he would have been appointed to put down the Jewish revolt by maybe the oligarchs who saw this as, gosh, they're raining on our party. We have this Herodian dynasty. You know about King Herod? Yeah? That was the dynasty that basically was the puppet power in Israel, and sort of gave them a figurehead, if you will, that they could look to for spiritual guidance. He was supposed to be sort of the leader of the Jews, and then most of the real work of the province of Judea devolved upon the praetor, the propraetor that was assigned there, the Pontius Pilates of the world. Okay, so somehow all of this stuff conspires to have Vespasian proclaimed emperor, make an short work, easy work of these others, be acclaimed by the folks that had originally embraced Galba and, oh, saved the world. And if you know anything about the time, Vespasian's family only ruled not even one complete generation. His son Titus took over after him, I think had about 10 good years, and then Domitian, the second son, took over and was again assassinated and replaced by, let's look at the successors here, replaced by Nerva, which, if you know anything about Nerva and the emperors that followed, was the age of the good emperors, when the emperors were not hereditary, they were chosen. The successor was chosen by the emperor for their virtue, for their abilities. And it led to the golden age of Rome. Trajan was another of these. Hadrian. Antoninus Pius had the longest reign of these great emperors. And then we have Marcus Aurelius, who is a great hero to Stoic philosophers, but in fact screwed up this game and appointed his son as his successor, or at least allowed his son to become. He had actually originally selected a guy named Lucius Verus. Unfortunately, he died before Marcus Aurelius did, and that allowed Commodus to take over, which, if you know anything about the movie The Gladiator, this is the story there. A story told in a very Hollywoodish way that probably has some secrets. I'm not going to go into that now because I haven't done my research on those secrets. Where do we go from now? So what I'm telling you needs to go back to the family of Josephus. Now, if you look at the years for Josephus, he came from a priestly family, born around 37. Okay, so this would have been after the supposed death of Jesus. Now, there's another interesting cat here, John the Baptist, who is fairly well attested. A Judean preacher who is looked to by many Christians as a very important figure. In fact, he's a very important figure in Islam and in the Baha'i faith and the Druze faith, okay, who classify him pretty much as important as Jesus. In fact, what I'm going to tell you is that John the Baptist was the real Jesus. He was the real preacher. And his father was Joseph. And his mother, Mary, went with Josephus, another Joseph, to Rome to keep their baby safe. The line of John the Baptist. Now it's funny, they make it out that he's part of the Essenes, a semi-ascetic Jewish sect, which makes you sort of think that, okay, John the Baptist wouldn't have had a wife or child. Interestingly enough, he's considered the prophet Yahya in Islam. Very important character, which is talked about a lot. And they believe that he is believed by Muslims to have been a witness to the word of God who would herald the coming of Isa al-Masih. Another in the stories, maybe he was predicting the Al-Mahdi. Al-Masih, Al-Mahdi, Almighty. A lot of weird ways you could go with these connections, huh? Okay, so what I'm proposing to you is that John the Baptist was indeed now there are a number of cats in this time who are pointed out as being revolutionary messiahs. John was of that stamp, but he never got a chance to march on Jerusalem. He was arrested and beheaded by Herod. Very important bit of history, which ties into, this is the same Herod, by the way, or the same dynasty, who supposedly went out and tried to eliminate all the male heirs of a certain. This is the story behind Jesus. Why they were in Bethlehem was because this Herodian predecessor, I think, of this Herod, it would have been Herod the Great, wanted to had a premonition that there was going to be a Messiah that was going to end his family's dynasty. This is a common repeating pattern, by the way, in a lot of stories. And he went out and supposedly was going to kill all the firstborn of a certain group of Jews. It's an interesting story. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but to say that I believe that John the Baptist was the real Jesus, and his teachings were modified basically to continue this story which was basically a story of this priesthood, this priestly line, which it was a line that was carried by females. In the Messiah game, the male lines are the Luciferian lines. They establish lines of male descent, which for 12 generations from the appearance of a Messiah have these effects of establishing new empires, golden ages of culture and art, passing the torch on to a new chosen people, passing on the Messiah story to a new Jerusalem, a new Bethlehem. Okay, and interestingly enough, the Christian story also makes a great deal of this other Joseph of Arimathea, who supposedly took the blood of Christ, the Holy Grail, to France, where there's a tradition that goes back very, very far. If you're very interested in the Templar Knights and the Grail story, well, you can go down that path. I'm not going to lead you down there except to tie these stories together. Okay, where am I going to finish up with this? I think I want to go and show you something that is going to kind of blow your mind. Now, the most famous there have been a lot of, in the history of Hollywood, there have been a lot of famous movies that were somewhat related to Christianity or Judaism. One that I was watching recently was called The Greatest Story Ever Told, and was about the life of Jesus, and had Max von Sydow as Jesus, who is maybe the last person I would have cast as Jesus, but somehow it worked at the time. Any rate, I'm not going to talk about that one because by far the most popular movie about that time was Ben-Hur. Fiction written by Lew Wallace. This is actually a person that I've talked about before, and I have a new twist to all this. This Lew Wallace, who was inspired to write this incredibly moving story of the Christ and of this other hero, revolutionary hero, the Prince Ben-Hur, was an interesting cat. He came from a fairly aristocratic American family. He was a graduate of West Point. He served in the Mexican-American War and was a general, or at least a senior commander, in the Civil War. And had a very, very tough time there because as a commander in the Civil War, he was involved in the Battle of Shiloh, which you will remember if you know much about Civil War history, was one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. And was one in which if the South had done a little bit better in that battle, that probably would have ended the war. At this point of the Civil War, the South was winning. And this guy, Lewis Wallace, was the commander of one of the major groups of troops in the Battle of Shiloh. And he was basically given orders to make an attack, and he disobeyed them. He thought, you know, this is suicide. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this to my men. I'm not going to send them to commit suicide. And he was put up on charges for it, and stripped of his command. And after the war, they further reviewed it, and they decided they exonerated him. They said, you know what? It would have been suicide to send your men out there, and you did the right thing. And later on, he got inspired to write this novel, The Prince of Hur. Now, where would you come up with wonderful ideas like that Hollywood just grabbed and turned into a star vehicle for, what's his name? Charlton Heston, who happens to have been in many, many, many incredibly influential movies, and is kind of persona non grata now because he is one of the ardent spokespersons for the right to own guns. Arch conservative. Oh, everybody in the woke cult absolutely hates Charlton Heston and wants to ban every movie he ever made, cancel it all. Well, interesting. Now, how does that relate? If you'll remember, the big exciting thing about Ben-Hur was the contacts between Rome and the East that allowed Ben-Hur to survive being a slave on the galleys, somehow saving the commander of this sea force and being adopted as his son. Do you see how this sort of fits a pattern? A story that maybe somebody knew or remembered, passed on to this Wallace guy, saying, hey, you know, you're looking for something to write? Here's a neat story that kind of, I think, would be a really good way to tell this Christ story in a way that kind of combines it with the idea, recombines it with the idea of the Messiah being more of a militant force, more of a, you know, hey, let's really go fight these bastards. And, you know, kind of make a new Messiah out of this Ben-Hur, Prince of Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur. You never see his father, do you? You only see his mother, who has a really bad time of it. She and the daughter, Tirza, end up getting stuck in a prison and becoming lepers, who are then cured by Jesus, who you never really see except for the time that he gives the Prince of Ben-Hur water. And I bet many people who see that movie think that must have been the real story. It probably really happened. And maybe it did. This is how the Messiah game works. That's why I kind of call it a shell game. Because the people that think that they're the Messiah, these Luciferian lines, they don't know the full game. They don't know that even if they've been part of a great family, the potency of that family only lasts for 12 generations. And then the torch gets passed to another family. 12 generations, 12 generations. Sometimes they overlap. So that the ending of the Caesar dynasty, they were already building this new dynasty. Several versions of it. They thought it was going to be this family of Galba. He got assassinated, so they found another candidate who had other connections. Vespasian. When his son, second son, was assassinated, suddenly this Nerva cat pops up. And the Roman Empire lasted for a long, long time. Under the most strange circumstances. If you know the late history of the later empire, you will know that it very nearly collapsed after the Emperor Valentinian was defeated in his attempt to conquer the East. Why was this? You know, this is an interesting thing. Why was there so much energy around conquering the East among Romans? Was it because they knew that the main threat, alternate dynasty, was there? One that would maybe tie into the Persian, Islamic dynasty we talked about yesterday. If you remember, the stories of Scheherazade were about a Sassanid king who had this interesting story with that created the 1001 Arabian Nights that inspired so many Muslim fighters with, you know, these dreams of 72 virgins in heaven. All the stories that emerged from the miraculous stories of the Arabian Nights all came from and inspired generations of young Muslims. Interesting. At any rate, so I think, you know, I'm calling this Lew Wallace is a literary messiah. Just like Shakespeare, just like Charles Dickens, Leo Tolstoy, all of these literary and artistic messiahs come from these unknown families. You remember I told you that karma and God can incarnate anywhere. Karma comes to bless people who are karmically pleasing and sets about a 12-generation karmic Messiah game. That produces authors and artists and nurses and healers. And sometimes one of those is successful enough to attract an incarnation of God, the capital messiahs. And that's the bigger game. The big messiahs get attracted when things get really, really, really bad. Like they were during the Roman Civil War, when the world was being torn apart. And the Second Roman Civil War. There was basically a civil war right after Caesar's death, and then it continued after they got rid of the assassins of Caesar and defeated the senatorial party. It continued with the follow-on civil war between the triumvirate, Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Caesar. Interestingly enough, is Cat Lepidus. You should learn a little bit more about him. There's another literary messiah you may not be aware of, Alfred Duggan, who wrote historical novels of lesser-known cats in history. He was one of my favorite authors growing up and a very unsung literary messiah. I should do a whole chapter on him and some of the novels that he wrote that call attention to people that had a huge, huge influence on history, but nobody ever talks about much. Well, I think I've gone on long enough. Let's see how we're doing on time. I hope this has been interesting. I would challenge you. Let's mention one more thing. I didn't really talk yet about why I singled out this bunch of people that are claiming that Jesus went to the East as particularly dangerous. And I would go as far as to call them heretics. I know that sounds nasty, doesn't sound very honest, but I am going to point out why I say that. Okay, it is those people who, if you haven't heard the much about what's going on in the dispute between Christian scholars, Jewish scholars, and scholars of the East, there's a lot of discord being sown in those circles, even in scholarly circles, among people who don't believe, but who are trying to discredit every other group of believers. If you've ever heard of the James Ossuary, many Christians believe that, we found the tomb of Christ, because there were some inscriptions on one of these tombs that match some of the names in the Gospels. And there were actually a bunch of tombs there. Let's look at that a little bit. Do I have that up still? I know I pulled it up earlier. Bear with me a little bit. Okay. Here's the story of the James Ossuary. Most Christians have heard of this, and maybe only heard that, it's been discredited, it's been debunked, and actually somebody was accused, that guy who discovered it was charged with 44 counts of forgery, fraud, and deception, including forgery of the Ossuary's inscription. However, that was in December 2004. He was found guilty, in fact, but later on was exonerated and acquitted upon further evidence that, yes, this inscription was that old and did fit that age. And many of you only heard, who didn't, hate Christianity and say, what a bunch of bunk, probably only heard this part of the story. It's been discredited. That was debunked long ago. You guys are so stupid. How can you believe anything like Christianity? Well, in fact, it was proven to be, yes, it could be believable. What's interesting is the other boxes in this tomb and the nature of this tomb. Some followers say, well, this couldn't have possibly been Christ's tomb because, Christ was this really special descendant of the real king of the Jews, and that's the Grail tradition, and therefore it would have been much nicer and fancier than this one, which looks like a pretty pedestrian tomb. Maybe a relatively wealthy priestly family, trading family, maybe a priestly family with connections to traders in Arabian horses, mules. Now, I was looking here to see if there was any connection. We know that the father of Joseph, Flavius Josephus, that Joseph, was a guy named Matthias. So he didn't have the Joseph name, or maybe he did, and they're hiding that. The inscription says James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, on this box. Other names in the tomb are Mariamne, which is a name that's very common to the Hashmonean dynasty. and also of the elite Jews of Alexandria. Very close ties there to Egypt, which, if you know the history of the Bible, the Old Testament, there's this story of the Jews coming out of Egypt and having their kingdom, and that's a very important piece of the Bible, isn't it? When in fact, what it looks like from the archaeological evidence is that this area, Israel, was a part of Egypt during this era, and it was actually a part that was partly conquered by the Sea Peoples. During their invasion, the Bronze Age collapse was because of these so-called Sea Peoples. They seemed to be a bunch of pirates that came and invaded and destroyed the old civilizations of the Near East and caused this sort of a dark age to fall over the old civilizations there, and established the Canaanites were of these Phoenician, Philistines, Phoenicians. They are all related. They established these cities on the coast, Gaza, Sidon, Tyre, that worshipped the cult of Baal and their goddess Ashtaroth, Easter, who was kind of bad-mouthed by the Bible as being the cult of the bad people, which ties into the whole story of how Genesis is about not God, but gods. The first words of the Bible are about Elohim, not God, the gods. And that's very key to the story that I tell you about the Messiah game. The Bible has wonderful stuff in it. It's got a record of messianic significance, but it's a narrative that has been doctored before it was even written down. And good guys have been hidden and bad guys have been promoted. This is how cultural Marxism works. Cult Marxism hides the good, and because it wants to destroy the current power and take it over. And sometimes that's part of the plan. But to the extent that you destroy history in taking power, that's when you serve the adversary. The anti-creative force wants to destroy all the evidence. And that's why the woke cult today I attack. They are trying to destroy and discredit evidence of the truth of the Messiah game. And the truth of the Messiah game doesn't involve us all being part of one cosmic consciousness, where our individual life is just, oh, well, we're just having this virtual reality experience so God can learn something from all the mistakes we make. So it's okay to do whatever you want because, you know, you're just part of God's big machine. And it's not real anyway because we're pure consciousness. This is a lie. This is a fundamental lie that many materialists are embracing. This idea that, oh, well, okay, we are part of all of creation, but it was all part of a scientific process, and really we all have a little seed of God within us that is always going to emerge and flower, and everything is built up into the Akashic records. And all we have to do is meditate, and we can open up the Akashic records and find the secrets of the universe. Nonsense. This is Lilithian lies, and they're trying to destroy the chosen species. They're not going to do it, but I don't want them to take any more souls to Lilith's hell than they have to. These are bad people. The people that want to destroy, cancel, rewrite, history are not your friends. They're not the good guys. They are the enemy. They are the adversary. They serve anti-creative forces who want to delay God's plan. And if you count yourself among them, you are going to what I would consider a hell. Yes, there is a heaven for neo-Buddhists. There is a nirvana. If you want to go there and you want to become part of the hive mind and sit there and meditate with your cell phones all day long, getting numby-gumby platitudes from Dalai Lamas and Eckhart Tolles and Alan Watts, you're going to get that. An eternity of that, thinking that you are doing something good when you're just wasting time and enabling people who want to destroy things. This is the truth of the Matrix movie. There are many Matrix universes of dark gods and goddesses who are going to milk your energy for an eternity in a virtual reality that serves their end, does not serve you, does not lead you closer to enlightenment, but pulls you into this fantasy where you think you're already there. And that is what is wrong with Neo-Buddhism, this idea of guru enlightenment. It's not easy to be a god. You don't get to be a god just because you have a spark of God within you. Everything is here in my Akashic records. That is a lie. It's a distortion. The truth is that every consciousness is an individual, comes from the line of God, the first consciousness, who said, I am, and had to define what I am not. That's the first two souls, God and Lucifer. God got a little bit better at creating after that and figured out other things. And karma was one of his best thoughts. Not I am or I am not, but this is the stuff that we all are, which are good ideas. That is who karma is. She's been collecting good ideas in her latest AI versions since before any of this all existed. And we have been, during day 7 of creation, testing the latest, greatest version of karma. And the final test has been God himself testing it. That version includes reincarnation amnesia, not remembering our previous lives, and having to figure out again who we are. Because you can't be a god if you haven't experienced a problem from many perspectives. The gods of science think they know what is good for humanity. They gave us a virus, the COVID virus. They gave us these cures that are not cures, the vaccines, which are not vaccines. They gave us a redefined word in the encyclopedia for vaccine that doesn't say it actually cures the disease, makes you so you can't get it. These people are lying to you. They are servants of the adversary. Okay, my wife says it's time to finish, and it should be time to finish. For the Omnist Hour, like, share, subscribe. This is Rob Trump signing out, and happy karma.